Hello, welcome to the channel. In this video I'm going to be converting this recumbent trike to electric power, so converting it to an electric trike. And I thought I'd bring you along. Might be one video, might be several, depends on how long it takes. So this is, in case you don't know, this is an ICE, which stands for Inspired Cycle Engineering, Adventure 20, so 20-inch wheels all round. It's a fixed rear, you can get them with suspension at the rear. This isn't my trike. What the owner's done here, instead of having suspension, is fitted some balloon tyres, which give a bit more shock absorption over the bumps, I suppose. So you might notice a few other things about this. Firstly, it ain't particularly clean. It's used every day, and that's why it isn't particularly clean. The owner's at the stage where there isn't quite the power in the legs that there once was, so I'm helping him convert it to electric power so he can cycle a bit further. So, a few differences between this one and the, I suppose, standard as you'd buy it. You might notice straight in front of me this mirror is rather large, give a better view behind. It's got bar end shifters, which you can get from ICE. This one didn't have them when it was bought, but they've been fitted subsequently. So that one does the rear derailleur, rear mech at the back. This one, although it's got a 3-ring chain ring there, actually you'll notice there isn't any derailleur on it, so the chain just stays on the middle ring. This one does the Sturmey Archer 3-speed hub. The reason it's got that is because that makes these much easier to ride. If you've been cycling along at quite a pace, you're on the biggest chain ring and then you have to stop suddenly for traffic or whatever, and then you need to restart again. You've got to have quite a lot of power in your legs to do that, especially if you're on a bit of a hill. But with this, you can shift it while you're stationary. You can shift it into its easiest, into the lowest of the 3 ratios, and then you can get going again. So that's why it's got that. It's got drum brakes, as you see, they're standard. It's got a few other modifications in terms of lights and things like that. I think that's about it. So the electric conversion that I'm going to do is using a Bafang BBSHD motor. This is the first electric bike conversion I've done, so the choice of motor was quite a tricky one. I went for that one with the view that it's better to have something that's rather over-specified and not use it to its maximum potential than have something that's under-specified and struggling to do the job. The owner wants to be able to get going from a standing start, so a fair bit of torque is needed. I'm aware that with that motor, if we have it on, giving it the full beans through the motor, it could well damage components on the bike, so snap the chain. I certainly don't think the 3-speed hub would be particularly happy, so we're going to have to be quite careful about that. I'll show you all the components in a minute. I will say the bike isn't particularly clean, as I said. I'm not going to clean the entire thing, but I am definitely going to clean the bits that I feel are important. So the drivetrain is going to get a thorough clean. Obviously anywhere where I'm fitting new clamps, I'll be cleaning the frame thoroughly before I fit them, so that we don't clamp any grit onto the paintwork and risk damaging it that way. So let's have a look at the components. Okay, so let's have a look at what we got. Here is it's a weighty beast, the Bafang BBSHD. I'll put it down that way up so it's not resting on the wires. 68mm bottom bracket. It comes with its own cranks. These are 170, which happily is exactly the same length as the ones that are on the trike at the moment. If you like particularly the chainring setup that you've got, or you're running short cranks as people often do with a recumbent, then you can get an adapter so you can fit your original cranks and chainring to the motor. I decided for now to go with the chainring that it came with. So the middle ring of the 3 is what it runs on all the time. That's a 42. This is a 44. So I'm going to give that a go, see how we get on. We can always change later. So the chain ring feels like it's alloy of some sort. It's not the prettiest piece of engineering, but it looks like it'll do the job. It's got alternating thin and thick teeth, so to bite into the chain, well, not bite into it, I guess to grip the chain more firmly, you could say. So next, I guess, is the controller. This is a C965 controller. I went for the basic one, just the monochrome display. I read that they're a little bit more reliable, and so I decided to go with that. It's got the three-button switch, or controller I should say. Thumb throttle as well. And then we've got a brake lever. I'm only showing you one, but there are two. Brake lever with a switch, so if you've got the brakes on, the power will be cut to the motor. Gear shift sensor as well, so the gear cable goes through the middle of this. You just cut the outer sheath off and the gear cable goes through the middle. Sensors when you're changing gear, and again cuts the power to stop you ripping your cassette or three-wheel or three-speed hub apart. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to put this on the derailleur shifter or on the three-speed hub. Probably the derailleur, because I think most people are in the habit of stopping pedalling when they're changing the internal geared hub, and if you stop pedalling, the power will be cut to the motor anyway. So I think if I had a choice of two, I'd put it on the derailleur. What else we got? Fitting kit for the motor. Battery, unit pack power as it says on there. So this is a 17, I think, yeah, 48 volt, 17 amp hour battery, allegedly with LG cells. I haven't taken it apart to find that out. Came with its own charger. Also comes with keys to lock it to the mounting point. Button there, when it's switched on you can check. In fact, let's do that now, making sure we've not got the terminals bridged. So you just check the state of charge there, switch it off again. Also in there's a USB charger, and then the charging port behind a little waterproof cover. So move on to some accessories. We need somewhere on the trike to mount this and all the other gubbins. And there isn't really any space as there is, so I've got this TerraCycle accessory mount. That's going to go next to the left hand handlebar. The display will be on here, and then I think the thumb shifter will be on here. For the battery, can you see all that? I'll unwrap it when I'm come to use it. This is a TerraCycle, turn it around the right way. TerraCycle or TerraCycle, depending on how you want to call them. Battery mount, specifically designed for ice trikes with rigid rear triangles or with no suspension. So that's part one of it. Part two is the mounting plate for large batteries, so that's going to fit on there just right. So let's just finish this section by talking about accessories or modifications that we might need to make to this to make it suitable for a recumbent. The wiring harness on this is obviously designed for a standard two-wheel bike, and I think the main difference is that on a recumbent this is much further away from the rear wheel than it is on a standard bike. This comes with a really nice kind of old school wheel speed sensor, so you tell it the circumference. This is based on a magnet and I presume a reed switch. You tell it the wheel circumference and it senses how often the number of revolutions of the wheel, and so it knows how fast the bike is going. We could fit this on one of the front wheels, but because it's a trike, the front wheels can turn at different speeds if you're going around a corner. That could confuse the computer, get a bit messy, so I've decided to fit it on the rear wheel, but that means that the wiring harness that this comes with isn't long enough. So thankfully you can buy very easily, extensions. I've just looped these together to keep them together. You can buy a 40cm and a 60cm extension. I might need both, or I might need just one, I'm not sure, but they're not very expensive, so I bought both just in case. And that will enable me to extend the wiring harness from the front to the back. The other wiring harness that we're going to need to extend, because you can see that's that long and that is only that long, and adding those together ain't going to go from behind the seat where the battery is going right up to the motor. So the other wiring harness we need to extend is the battery. So I've got some cable. This is 4mm square cross section, 60 volt upper voltage limit for the insulation, so plenty for what we're dealing with here. We've got some sleeving as well, just as some chafe protection, because you really don't want these chafing through and giving all the battery power, because that's a recipe for a fire or something nasty to happen. So this sort of expands and contracts, and this will give a good amount of chafe protection for that cable. What I haven't worked out yet is where I'm going to put the brake in the cable, because it would be nice to be able to disconnect them, preferably in a hurry actually, just in case anything went terribly wrong. But I also want them to be waterproof, so I haven't quite worked that out yet. I'm going to get it going without the waterproofing, and then we'll sort that out afterwards. Finally, I've got a new gear cable, because the gear cable on this one is already pretty much on its limit, and if I've got to break the sheathing and put the gear shift sensor in place, I suspect I'm going to need more cable, so I've got that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started now. That's going to involve firstly lifting the trike off the ground. I'm going to put it on some axle stands, obviously with some bits of carpet or something to stop it getting scratched, just so it's a bit higher, a bit easier to work on. I'll be taking the seat off. One thing to say about all that kit before we get started, I have connected it all up and just checked it works off the bike, and I felt that was an important thing to do once it had arrived, to make sure I didn't need to send it back straight away, make sure I hadn't got something completely duff. Now, I can't really test it properly because without a signal from the wheel speed sensor it doesn't really like it, but you can at least get the impression that it's working. And the other thing I've done, and I'd recommend you do, is to get a multimeter and check that when your battery is switched off there isn't indeed any voltage on the terminals, because if there is, you would be wise to treat them with caution and probably insulate them. You may say it's only 48 volts, 50 volts. That is, with the current that these batteries can give, that could actually be quite nasty for you if all of that went through your body. So I would encourage you to check that your power off switch does actually work. Lecture over, let's get started. Seems stable enough. Right, time to take the seat off, I think. In case you've not done this before, that's a quick release behind the seat, just here, loosen it. And then this is an older model, so the release mechanism isn't quite as slick as on the newer ones. It's essentially two more quick releases under here. They're not actually that quick, they're just thumb screws, thumb turns, and then a collar that slides back. So that one pulls away, and then it enables the seat to lift off. This bike's got some additional lights which are a very good idea on these. You're a bit lower down just to help drivers see you. Unfortunately, the way these have been installed makes removing the seat a bit more of a challenge. I think for now we'll just set it to the side and leave that connected. So I think broadly speaking I'm going to work from the front of the bike backwards. We'll start with taking all this off. Going to need to lose these light and accessory mounts as well, because the motor's going to need to tilt back and rest against there. These are 8mm. I'm using a crank puller tool. Now, what size are you? You're a 15. No, you're not. You're a 16. You're both 16. Okay, so I haven't got all my tools with me today, which is a bit of a frustration because I know that I've got two 16mm spanners, but not here. So apologies for the, well, not bodgery, but you know, adjustable spanner here, because it's all I've got. This is a good one, it's the Barco, so it'll do the job just fine. There we go. Obviously I'll be swapping the pedals over in due course, but we don't need to worry about that yet. It's coming off nicely, which is good. Although it's coming out, that bottom bracket feels in really good condition. No play at all, no crunchiness, so that's fine to keep for another project. It's actually just lifted the bike nearly off the rear axle stand, so let's have that back on. That's the side with the left hand thread. One of those things, don't know about you, I just really struggle to commit it to memory. A few shards of aluminium here where the chain slipped off before, so just being careful with my fingers. So I vote for the Bafang BBSHD. That has had thousands of miles on it and it's still in good nick. Just a quick test fit. That's going to be fine. Obviously this bracket needs to come off first. Okay, so we've got the bottom bracket ready, cleaned it up as best I can. Obviously, as I said at the start, there's been some paint lost from there where the chains come off before. Cleaned up all the areas that it's going to be more difficult to get to when the motor's in place. The light's just hanging at the moment. These are pretty good lights. I mean, obviously it looks quite homemade because it is, but they're very bright. These are Cree super bright LEDs. I know because I designed these myself, although I didn't actually make them. It'd be nice to be able to carry on using that. Unfortunately, the way the motor goes, we won't be able to use that bottom screw hole there. So I'm hoping that just one will be sufficient to hold it. If it's got a big washer, it'll probably hold it tight enough because they're really light. But that's just going to be hanging down there for a moment while we get this sorted out. So the next stage is to start building up the motor. So we've got 5 of these with a little bit of pink thread lock on them. And they're 4mm. Okay, so the next stage is to put it on the bike, and then that piece goes on there like that once it's on, and this has got a punched outside and a punched inside, so you want the punched outside to be gripping onto the metal of the bottom bracket, so that bit is going to go against the other side of the bottom bracket. You'll see once I've got it on. And then we've got 2 nuts. That one, wow, 50 to 60 Newton meters, that is pretty tight. And then that one, 25 to 30. Okay, we'll come to those in a bit. Try and get that to catch the light. So these raised up ridges here need to go inwards against the bottom bracket. Put a little bit of copper slip, anti-seize, whatever you wish to call it, on those. Not quite as in the elements on a recumbent as it would be on a standard bike, but nonetheless. Now that isn't going in particularly easily, so I'm just going to check there isn't something stuck in the thread. Because these aren't the sort of things you want to force, because you just strip the thread. Feels alright. Yeah, it feels okay. get them started with the plate away from the motor surface, just to allow a bit more play in it. Still seems to be fouling against something. Just going to ease that ever so slightly with a file. It's actually touching against the housing of the motor, so I'm just going to file that down a bit so it can slide freely. In case you're wondering why that made such a hollow sound, there's an inspection pit for working on cars under here. Extra random fact for you. Okay, so I've run into my first little challenge. A bit disappointed about this one. That bolt there stands proud compared to that moulding piece there, and that means that that bolt actually stops this from going flat against the motor housing. You can see like that. What I'm going to try and do is take this out. Obviously one option is to drill a hole in that, but that's, where are we? One option is to drill a hole in that, but that's quite a chunky piece of metal. I could drill a hole in it, but I'd rather not weaken it by doing so. So I'm just wondering if I can take this out and put it back in without the washer. I think that'll make enough difference. Of course the washer won't come off, so let me just give that a little bit of encouragement. Okay, I've taken that washer off. Wasn't particularly straightforward, but I did it. If this works, I'll come back and put some thread lock on that one in lieu of the spring washer that I've had to take off. And it has indeed worked. That's just the right amount of clearance. I don't know whether that one was supposed to not have a washer in it from the start, or how that's managed to happen. It doesn't seem to be a particularly quality job, but there you go. Okay, so back where we were before. I'm installing it up against this, like this, because the motor wants to turn this that way, but in doing so the motor itself wants to go that way. So if it's butted up against this, then it can't turn any further. I know we're going to put various things in place to lock it in position anyway. Now that doesn't seem quite right to me. Seems to be too much play there. This needs to be really tight. So I think we need a spacer, because you can see there's still 1 or 2 millimeters the gap there. I know we're going to screw some things on the outside of it, but with these tightened in place like that, that's not actually going to bring those in to lock it against there. So I think we need a spacer on that side. Which sadly means that's about as far as I can go today. Alright, so we need a spacer for this, probably a 2mm. I might buy 2 of them just to see. Before I do that, I'm just going to rig up the chain just to see what the chain line looks like. Really difficult to assess, but it looks like it's hitting the pulley at a reasonable angle. It's out a little bit. It's out quite a lot actually. So I might look at whether I can stand that pulley off a little bit. Yeah, might look at doing that. So spacer for the pulley, spacer for that.